Hi everyone, it's Matt with an Essential Skills video. This video is a little bit different as it's more for the mentees and those people who work in our agencies who have taken the mentoring from our regional mentors. The purpose of this video is to explain thinking skills. So as you know, I'm going to share my screen first here with you. Oh, right, there we go. Okay, so as you know, thinking skills is one of the 9 essential skills. Actually, it changed its name to just thinking, so that's the correct term. Thinking is one of only 2 essential skills, the other being numeracy, that divide themselves up. So in thinking, we have 6 what we call applications. And the applications are really just the 6 different types of thinking skills that go under thinking. So in no particular order, the thinking applications are job, task, planning, and organizing, problem solving, decision making, finding information, critical thinking, and finally, significant use of memory. Okay, so those are the 6 applications of thinking skills, and they are interrelated with another, but they are different enough that they are kept separate as different applications. So we're going to talk about each one on its own first. And first, we're going to look at significant use of memory. So notice it's called significant use of memory and not just memory. And the reason for that is because it doesn't include everyday sort of stuff like remembering where you work or how to get there, and remembering your coworkers' names and things like that. It's a little bit different. Significant use of memory divides itself into 3 types. This is different than all of the other essential skills. They don't do that. The first type is basically purposeful long-term memory. So that means you usually memorized it on purpose and by repetition and by repeated use. So a couple examples of that would be a grocery store cashier or someone who works with bulk food who remembers all the codes. So someone buys bananas and the cashier knows that's 4011. They don't have to look it up in a document or Rolodex sort of thing. Bulk food and produce usually have a code on them to help the cashiers weigh them and ring them in that way. Or a taxi driver who remembers where all the streets and certain landmarks and businesses are in a city. And a sales rep who remembers their customers' names and about their needs. So that's the first type. The second type is memorization that's short term. So a server or waiter or waitress is a good example of this because they often remember orders without writing them down. They also remember the daily specials. The final type is what I kind of call episodic memorization, but it's really learning that happens from a unique learning event. And that's just a way of saying something happened that's going to make you remember that. For example, a car mechanic who is dealing with an issue that they were having, an issue in a car that they didn't know what it was, and they learned it eventually and remembered it that way. So it happened from a single episode or a single learning event, and that's embedded in the memory. So it wasn't from long-term memorization or anything like that. The next application, like I said, these are in no particular order, is finding information. Now, finding information can be procedural, which means you basically know where you have to look if you need a certain thing. Back to that cashier, let's say they don't remember the produce codes, but they know how to look it up. They know where to go. They don't have to look at multiple sources to find the information. They It can involve looking in a policy manual for something, a parts catalog, a flyer, or if you need to call a certain coworker on their office phone, you know to look in the directory to find their phone number. So that's easy examples of finding information. But it can be difficult as well. Let's say a tour guide who is trying to write a script for giving bus tours to visitors in a city. They would look up information in all sorts of different documents, like brochures and history books and things like that. So it can involve some compiling, and sometimes you don't know where to go to find information. You have to figure that out for yourself, and that's more complex. Or a cook who wants to make a new recipe, they may look at different recipes and synthesize that information, which means they put it together in their head and come up with something that way. The third application is job task planning and organizing. This has to do with how much control a worker has over his or her work. So if you have a job where you do the same thing every day and it's repetitive, and maybe you do a checklist and follow the checklist, and the checklist could be the same or different every day, that's considered low complexity because you don't have to decide what to do and you don't have to prioritize the task yourself. Someone else does it for you. Sometimes there are interruptions in the work, and that makes it a little bit more complex. And some workers who get to create their own schedules, they plan their appointments, they self-direct their work. That makes it more complex. Um, this this application also includes how many sources you have of work assignments, and that just means how many people are telling you what to do. So if you're responsible to do things from multiple sources, so you have different people who give you work assignments, that makes the work more complex as well. The next two applications, problem solving, decision making, those two often go together, but they are separate. We're going to look at problem solving first. So problem solving can be basically a real integral part of your job. Let's go back to a car mechanic who has to diagnose a problem with a vehicle. That's solving a problem. A grocery clerk who has to help an unhappy customer. Something's in the flyer, it's on sale, but you're all out. That's a very common occurrence. So that counts as problem solving as well. A baker or a cook or a chef who's run out of an ingredient. Problem solving is, do they have another ingredient that could take its place? Should they go to a grocery store and pay retail price instead of waiting for the wholesale price? Those are all different options they can use to solve the problem. Or a tradesperson who has a tool that is broken or is missing. Most of these require some sort of decision to be made. Like I said, problem solving and decision making do often go hand in hand. So decision making is an example of this. Decision making that's not problem solving is let's say a custodian is looking at switching up their supplier for a certain cleaning product, like window cleaner. They have to make a decision, but it's not really solving a problem. They make it, a decision making becomes more complex depending on whether there's a set procedure for making the decision. It also becomes more complex if that decision has consequences, if the wrong decision's made. So for example, a cashier has to decide whether or not they are asking customers for ID when they're buying cigarettes or alcohol or something like that. So when they're deciding, that's kind of a middle of the road complexity, because if they make the wrong decision, they don't ask someone who should be asked, they could get in trouble. But It could be bigger. There could be legal consequences for not asking, especially if it's a secret shopper and they get busted, or the consequences could be nothing as well. The cashier has to decide whether to accept a product return. It could be rotten vegetables. It could be clothing that has a tear. It could be something that doesn't work correctly. The decision, the consequence for making the wrong decision there is pretty minor. But a police officer who has to decide what to do in a hostage taking, that this has major irreversible consequences potentially. So then the complexity of their decision making is a lot higher than of a cashier. Finally, we have critical thinking. Critical thinking it always requires some sort of judgment or evaluation that has to be made. It often results in a decision as well. So you can see how decision making is also ingrained in critical thinking. A hiring manager that has to sort through resumes decides who is worth interviewing and who is not. They ultimately make a decision. A cashier who judges the condition of an item that's being returned. Does it look like this fits the criteria for a return or not? An early childhood worker or babysitter or daycare worker, they may evaluate the progress that a child has made. They even assess injuries, even choosing age-appropriate books. They make simple, low-level critical decisions like, is this book too young or is it too old for those children? A baker or a cook judges the quality of ingredients that they buy. They also judge the quality of their very own work. Is this worth serving? Critical thinking tasks usually have a word like judge, critique, evaluate, or assess in them. So thinking is a part of every job to differing degrees. Some jobs require a lot of thinking and some require a little, but they all require some. Thinking is a difficult skill to teach to learners and clients, and essentially thinking is learned through reflection, self-reflection, reflection, and practice. So to become a better thinker, we have to think about the decisions we made and whether they can be improved upon. All right, so I hope you learned a bit more about thinking from this video. I'll see you again with more methodology videos in the future. Thank you.